Hello, welcome to SHOWstudio. We're all here melting away for fashion, of course. If we get through this without fainting, it will be a good panel. We're here to talk about Walter Van Beirendonck, and let's get this over and done with. Starting with the introductions at the end. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm Tom Rasmussen. I am editor and co-founder of Cause and Effect magazine, contributing editor at Love, and contributing features editor at ID. And I'm a drag queen, which is relevant for this panel, I think.
Hi, I'm Dino. I unfortunately am not a drag queen yet, but hopefully one day. And I'm an online editor at Because magazine.
I'm Jake. I'm a freelance writer all over the place. And I'm also a PhD student doing fashion and queer theory.
And I am Mactaggart, and I'm gay, which makes me supremely qualified to talk about Walter Van Beirendonck, of course. It's the only qualification you need. I want to talk a bit about London, because when I was doing a bit of a look into Walter, I was reading his article on he had an interview about his retrospective in Antwerp back in 2011. And what stuck out to me, he said, I think London is still an incredibly enjoyable city, but when we, the Antwerp Six, first went, it was a very conscious decision because London was so energetic. Body Map comes to mind, Lee Bowery, and that whole new romantic period, and punk. It was such a lively atmosphere at the time. Unfortunately, I don't feel the same energy in the London fashion scene now. I truly hope young people turn London into a lively city again. That was back in 2011, so I wanted to kind of open up by asking, do we think that we're in a better place with London now?
London fashion.
London fashion, London culture, music, everything.
I think London fashion, men's fashion specifically, we are at the moment, with like the young guard coming, like Charles Jeffrey, Art School, you know, who else was in at Man Art School, and
Rottingdean Bazaar.
And Rottingdean Bazaar. I think they're all really exciting and energetic. So I do think there, but I'm not sure about London culture. I feel like everything's being slightly homogenized around, you know. That's what I would say.
I agree. Also, rent prices, things just aren't sustainable. Like, if you look at so many conversations about London back then, people came to London because it was cheap. And people talk about the Antwerp Six, but they said themselves that they could never do what they did then now.
Right.
Because that's
I guess that's what I'm kind of,
Yeah, because the culture of it has changed so much. So I think there are still really incredible designers. Probably too many to name. I think Graduate Fashion Week as well, LCM, CSM are still churning out some really kind of like brilliant designers. But I just think that it's never going to be what it was, but that's okay.
I think like with so many art schools in London, I think there's never going to be a lack of talent here. There's just like, you can't deny RCA, you can't deny CSM, you can't deny LCF. Just that's something that's of heritage, and that's always going to kind of breed new talent. But on the same note, like they literally rented a van in '86, all 6 of them, and came to London to show their collection at London Fashion Week. I think if you think about it now, with so much infrastructure and about London Fashion Week, about such organizations, like you can't really do that. There was a men's designer, and I'm so sorry that I don't know her name, who showed like in front of the London Fashion Week men's venue at like now, a few weeks ago. She's Iranian born, and she basically showed her collection in front of it, and it was kind of that rebelliousness that reminded me of when I saw the Jacquemus first presentation way back when in front of, I think it was a Galliano collection or something. I'm just like stating like wrong facts, but it's just my memory. Yeah, so kind of like I feel like there is this level of rebelliousness, and Art School and Rottingdean Bazaar, who are kind of new and fresh and party in that true and honest way. But like if you think about Walter, and if you think about that high level of like geniusness, probably we're oversaturated and we can't see it that much, even though probably it is somewhere there, deep down inside those 20 shows a day. But yeah.
I also think, going on from what Jake said about like hiking rent prices and, you know, gentrification, et cetera, you also have factors like Brexit. You also have factors like The fact that the art school, you know, CSM, LCF, they are great institutions, but they also cost £9,000 a year. So, you know, we are missing, it's an age-old conversation, but we are going to be missing out loads of working class talent, you know, European talent, I'm sure. I mean, I don't know what Brexit's going to look like, but it does feel like the difference between 1986 and now is quite remarkable in terms of accessibility and ability to, like, get yourself seen and get yourself in the center. You know, there's such like a world, a structure around it that you have to move through in fashion, but also in art, in everything to succeed now. It's quite sad. I think we're
Of course, I think people do sometimes romanticize struggle, but I do think that with everything that's happening, people are going to try and have to find new ways around it. So I think in a way it can be good with all these changes because you have to be pragmatic. And I think that is, like you were talking about, designers that are showing off schedule. And I think increasingly the way that the fashion system works, it is being constantly renewed. Like you see Vetements that have become the recent brand to kind of like spark that conversation again. So I am kind of hopeful that maybe people will start to find how that creativity and that rebelliousness could work today and like work around those factors.
Yeah, I mean, we brought up I suppose designers like Art School and like Charles Jeffrey that were brought up a bit earlier, who I suppose epitomized this kind of moment of a kind of transgenderism, post-genderism that's at play also in work like Palomo Spain, things like that. Talking, I suppose, about where gay culture is at now in the fashion industry and the music industry. Do we think we're at a very progressive moment?
I think we're at a crossroads between gay culture becoming commercial and gay culture kind of retaining what it was. I mean, I think that all those brands are really brilliant, but there are also people like, for example, Grace Wells Bonner, who I think she really queers black masculinity. So I think that now there's kind of scope to move that conversation further. I don't think it's necessarily just about gender or about sexuality anymore, because those things have now, maybe not in the fashion world. I'm still quite hopeful that they haven't become those things in the fashion world. But I think the industry, like the commercial industry and the advertising industry, realize that those things are they are commodities. So therefore it kind of moves into that, and you have to question what's genuine, I think, more than ever before.
What's what, sorry?
What's genuine?
Definitely.
No, I feel like there's a lot of queerness that is still not being explored. I think gay, as it's almost treated as a subculture, which is always kind of weird because it's not really the fact that it's sexuality doesn't necessarily define a whole subculture by gay. And I feel like gayness is kind of being commercialized through all this, but I think some level of queerness, and I really want to hear your opinion on that because I'm sure you know much more than I do, is I think that I feel like that queerness is still being like underrepresented, so everything else but being gay. And I think that's where the Charles Jeffreys and the art schools come in as this kind of prototypical kind of like very outrageous gay and queer and trans and everything in between. But I think there's like this kind of lack of layers in that, in a way. Like there's like this very extreme, like very big extremities where it's like either Versace or like something hyper masculine like Berluti suits, and then you've got Charles Jeffrey. But I think the in-between is still has still some space to develop.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's always space to develop, but I do think that they should be paid their dues, people like Charles Jeffrey and Art School, who are doing, I think we need to be careful with pronouns, etc., when describing them right now, but I do think that it's queerness, and it's done really well, and each season, for me, Charles Jeffrey has grown each season every time into a more and more of a depiction of a queer world. The thing about queerness is it can't be one thing, so we're never gonna, we can't expect Charles Jeffrey and Art School to provide us everything in terms of a queer conversation. But I think they're doing a good job, and I think when I watch a Charles show, or when I watch an Art School show, I feel represented, I feel excited, I feel like, oh, there's someone speaking my voice in fashion.
Well, I guess this is something I'm quite keen on picking up on, because I see these shows which are kind of lauded as, triumphs for LGBTQ plus culture, and I actually feel not represented by that. I was reading an article by Bret Easton Ellis, which came out a while ago, around Moonlight receiving an Oscar nomination, and he was talking about he calls it the reign of the reign of the gay magical elves, and he's talking about he talks a lot about this infantilizing, I suppose, of gay men in the media, in Hollywood, in television programs, when they do come out and act celebratory about their identity in a very specific way, in a very kind of brunch type of way, a very kind of planning beautiful weddings and, being two lawyers, and that kind of Desperate Housewives or Modern Family type of gay couple is one that I don't really recognize. And I'm not saying that Charles really represents that kind of character. But I do see, I don't know, something missing from the conversation there about
what do you think is missing?
Queer culture.
I mean, I think there's always going to be something missing. I don't think Charles Jeffrey can be responsible for representing all of queer culture, but more like, I can't fit in any of those clothes. I can't afford any of those clothes. However, I do feel like when I watch it, I'm like I don't know, it just feels like something I've seen and like I know on my scene, and it's very important to have a scene that's yours, a scene that's ours as queer people. And I do feel like it's amazing that he's exposing the wonder of our scene in a way on the catwalk. And I do think there's a delineation here to be made between gay men and queer culture, because gay men and queer culture are hugely different. And I totally agree with what you're saying about Bret Easton Ellis, about in the media we're so dumbed down, we're so pigeonholed into these assimilationist kind of white muscular gays who just want money and 2.4 kids and marriage, and that's not what I want. But I do think Charles Jeffrey isn't that. I think in a quite productive way. I do think it's not that.
I just have one quick thing. I agree. I just have a feeling what Finn is kind of pointing out is what I kind of have a feeling. I have the same feeling. Maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like Charles Jeffrey's outlandish gays are the next generation's two lawyers with children in a way, and it's kind of that outlandish and that I don't know, extreme vision of gayness is kind of the modern type of those two lawyers that were maybe 10 years ago or whenever. And I have a feeling this has been this collection, even though I can completely appreciate it, I feel like it was kind of taken in the media as the kind of these are the gays of London, and this is how queer culture looks.
And to bring it back, I suppose, to London, we are incredibly privileged to live in London, where we can, to varying degrees, walk around in clothes like this, which would just be impossible in other places in this country or in other countries. And I suppose I see a lot of gay hedonism in this. It's the kind of gay hedonism that puts me off of a Pride festival or things like that.
Do you think this is the same as a Pride festival? I think not to, but in my personal experience, I grew up in the far northwest of the country, and I get far more homophobia here than I did there. I got beaten up really badly last year on the street. Homophobia is still a real problem for people, and I think still this is. I just have to disagree. I like Charles Jeffrey's stuff. I don't think he's the most radical. I think he is good, but I don't think he's the most pinnacle of radicalism and the most brilliant, depiction of queerness. But I do think it still takes bravery, and it still takes courage to walk out. Look at James Spencer. Is that James Spencer? Yeah. In the middle there, walking out in a doublet and a skirt and knee-high boots. I'm sorry, but even in London, I still think it's brave, and that I just have to disagree and say that I don't think that is they are the lawyers of tomorrow. I think the lawyers of tomorrow are lawyers already, and I think we don't know any of them because we all work in fashion, in and around fashion. I do think it's still brave. I'm sorry, and of course he's being very celebrated for it, but I personally think it's really brave.
That's the thing, though. It's like we wouldn't be having these conversations about any other designer because it is that whole issue of representation. So because Charles Jeffrey becomes the one queer designer, it's an emphasis to be perfect.
Yes.
And it's fine if he isn't. Like, it's fine if you don't think that he is. But it's like, I mean, I think he's great. But I also think he represents one vision. There's room to represent more visions.
I think there's an amazing designer that I'm like obsessed with since the RCA show. It's Bianca Saunders. She's like at the MA Fashion menswear, and she had this collection. If we can bring it up, it was really interesting. She talks about black masculinity, and she did like recently an event at the Miranda at the Ace Hotel, and it was all about kind of the idea of dressing and versus sexuality, so masculinity versus sexuality, and her whole concept is not necessarily about gayness, it's about being masculine and dressing, especially for black culture, in a similar way that Grace Wells Bonner does, but I think with Grace it's more about like historical and kind of like different, more like poetic, rather than with Bianca, it was very street and very, I know that you don't like the word street, but it was genuinely like streetwear that was kind of reinterpreted in a new and interesting way. And I feel like that's something, she's one designer that I feel like has something to say on that subject, even though she's not necessarily a man or a gay man. But as much as I know. But I think there's a lot of young voices that do explore that, and I feel like there should be more spaces than just one, and that's basically how I feel, not necessarily.
I suppose to bring it back to Walter, what I really appreciate about Walter's work, particularly in the 90s, was the kind of how explicit it was. And for me, that resonates far greater and says a lot more about gay culture, which I think a lot of gay men, I think, are afraid of talking about, is how, we are outside of the norm, and I quite like celebrating that our sexual behavior is very different to heterosexual couples. And I think Walter brings out, everything from, I think you were mentioning the Dick shoes.
Oh yeah, of course.
And also having, in this show that we're looking at now, which is Spring Summer 96, he has these huge masks, and some of them say horny as hell. And I just love that kind of sexual, being that literal about sexuality and that explicit about sexuality. And I feel like that is something we're losing in this kind of more gender fluid conversation, which loses the kind of, I don't know, raw sexuality of...
That's why I think it's really important to make a distinction between gay culture and queer culture, because queerness is, by and large, it's an ideology. It's about destabilizing what you think is real.
Right.
So that's when, obviously, you queer black masculinity, you're intersecting at those stereotypes and you're shattering them. So I think it's, the two get conflated quite a lot. But Walter, you have to have those extremes. And I think to Walter as well, it was almost like a reclamation, because obviously the promiscuous gay is like one of the oldest stereotypes in the book. We all know it. It's like AIDS became a very stigmatized disease, and it was linked to sex. And I think that stigma still resonates. So I think there's a real power in reclaiming that sexuality and taking it away from being something that's perverse and something that's celebrated.
Well, I feel like the gay establishment at the moment would be very, going back to Bret Easton Ellis, he once made a joke about Glee and involved HIV in that joke. GLAAD, who are the American kind of gay establishment, were totally outraged by this and very offended. And his response was that we shouldn't moralize this issue of HIV. We should be able to use dark humor. He had a lot of friends who were suffering with it, and spoke of how they used dark humor to cope with it, and said that it was really the right wing that were moralizing this issue, when really it was something that was an incredibly unfortunate thing to plague the gay community. And that comes up a lot in Walter's work. He discusses HIV and safe sex. How do you think that interplay works in his work?
I think it's one of those things that you can make a statement, but you have to be open for that statement to be critiqued. So I think it's like if somebody calls you out, I think we live in such a world of like takedown culture. And
Exactly,
it's like,
yeah.
It doesn't progress the conversation. Like if you're going to get criticized for something that you've said or done, it can be so, especially when it comes to things like you being insensitive, it can be so easy to have that gut reaction. And it's about everything. Like it starts people talking about sexuality, talking about gender, talking about race, because those conversations get shut down. But the thing is, like, if you say something, you can be a good person and still say something homophobic. Like, it's one of those things, like, it's culturally conditioned. It's one of those things that's ingrained into you. It's about taking ownership over those mistakes, holding your hands up if you genuinely believe you were wrong, and then progressing the conversation.
I mean, this is just mesmerizing.
No, I'm sorry, I feel like I'm semi-ignoring the conversation because I'm like, I literally hear you in the back.
This is just really good fashion.
But I also think there's a context there with what Walter's doing here is we've all gone silent about HIV now. Too silent. I completely believe that. But I do think there was not that I'm desperate for this urgency back, but there was a real urgency then when Walter was working to comment, either to not comment or comment. Gay conservatism, which is like, people saying you can't joke about HIV, we can't have drag queens, as our front-facing image, we've got to all be men in suits, that punctuates.
Well, or even progressives who say that drag queens are, feminist progressives who say that drag queens are actually very offensive, which is something I disagree with, but it comes from both sides there.
Yeah. But I think that gay conservatism punctuates our history. I do think that the frame shift is that now we're looking at queer culture, and I agree with what you're saying. I love looking at. I love the idea of like exposing our sexual practices. I think. Bernard Wilhelm is someone who does that really well. I think. Even Peter, I never know how to say his name, Sebastian Peter, even though it's literally sweaters and like jewelry, it still says cruise on it, it still says grind on it, he still had the PrEP pill embroidered onto shirts, and I think that's gay culture. This to me is gay culture and a bit queer culture. This isn't just gay culture. I guess just back then queer wasn't really a terminology that was very well used in the mainstream.
Well, I want to bring in as well, listening to the music for this show, now we're looking at someone on a horse, dragons.
I'm sorry, that was the top that you were wearing in this collection.
That's right, yes.
So, just to spot that, just to do that.
But this is a comment on the whole of fashion. You would never, I wish, but this is genius. You would never see this in fashion.
Well, precisely, and this is why, some people would call me a purist, but fashion used to be better. Look at this. This is insane.
It's
so much.
It looks completely
the only
insane.
people that do that is like Philip Klein now, and like Dolce
Oh
Gabbana.
God, not that
Like
awful.
That's
Philip
like they do like
Klein show.
3-hour spectacles. That's the only people that do it. That like.
But when spectacle comes up these days, really all they mean is Kendall Jenner, and that seems to be about all they mean by spectacle is using social media to create some kind of buzz, rather than, and what's so strong about this, is going back to really fantastic fashion show production. I feel like everyone's obsessed with getting that image from the show that travels globally. And what they forget is these shows were so well produced. There's obviously a lot of money that goes into them, which is something that's quite difficult for young designers now. I know in this show, Walter was sponsored by a denim company called, which I'm now completely forgetting.
Yeah, I don't know, I forgot.
A Western denim brand, which allowed him to do some of this stuff. But I'm interested to get a bit more of a take on fashion show production and production value that we're getting at fashion shows today. I
think what you said is the place to start, about the obsession with getting an image that will travel around the world. How fashion's changed since this point. Fashion was arguably more elitist at this time. It was so exclusive. It was so it's the kind of ab-fab days, which again, that's when I was reading Vogue, when I was watching ab-fab, I was like, that's. In a really superficial way, that's what I wanted to work in. And then I realized there was so much politics that could come with clothes, with what you wear, etc., etc. But I do think that, again, a bit like Jake said earlier, we romanticize a past time, but you have to be responding to a current system. And, you need, 65K to put on like a fashion show where 12 models walk back and forward. How are we going to do this? And it's sad. I think that this doesn't exist anymore, but it's like the system that we all feed into in fashion everyone who works in fashion, everyone who watches fashion, everyone who buys and shares fashion, that system is created by us in a way, and I don't know the solution to get out of it, but where it's like, you know, yeah.
I feel like this is sorry, I feel like this is as amazing as is like those amazing Studio 54 videos that you find on YouTube, or like Motown, like where they do like the, how do you call it? Oh my God, where they do like a circle and then they dance in between and like whatever, like Soul Train. Thank you. So I think that's as amazing as that, but I feel like we shouldn't, even though I would personally love to be able to be part of all of that, I feel like we shouldn't really grasp for that, but look forward into like what can we create, like what is the next kind of presentation that's going to stop people's minds. What's the next type of production that you can do in London, like whether it's a guerrilla thing, whether it's...
Well, this is why I suppose the conversation around brands like Art School and Charles Jeffrey kind of bugged me, because especially when they're so clearly referencing such a heyday in London of club culture, of queer culture, of gay culture, body map, all the names we mentioned earlier. It seems to me a real letdown to end up with a kind of amateur-looking, kind of hokey dance group that come out and then are kind of like, you know, kind of knock off references to Galliano and Body Map and Lee Bowery and this kind of thing. And it just feels like a bit of a letdown for gay culture. Indeed, Art School, I think we can be, like, as trans and gay people, can be wearing much better clothes than that. When I think of sort of trans icons or queer icons, I think of people who are utterly fabulous and really were much more game-changing than these kind of hokey-looking clothes.
I don't think they're hokey-looking.
Like, now go for it, Jay.
I was just saying that it strikes me as such a...
Go on. You don't think they're hokey?
A lot of also, that's quite a lot of pressure you're putting on trans people and queer people to be iconic. Some people don't want to be fabulous, just quickly.
Well,
I don't want to be described as fabulous. I want to be described as intelligent and sexy. But not fabulous.
You are.
I think that, like, I don't know, I think, again, we're getting mixed up with gay culture and queer culture. Queer culture, I think there's an amazingness about the DIY elements that are to do with...
That was all part of 80s. All the stuff that they're referencing is directly related to a heyday of DIY culture.
Yeah, fair.
And Charles has come through CSM in a way that a lot of those designers had not been given such incredible
the question,
training.
I guess, is when you have no money, when you do have no money, how it's, you know, when you're working to make enough money to survive in London, which has become highly gentrified, how are you, you know, I think it's remarkable what these young designers come up with. And, you know, say like the young DIY music scene, I think it's kind of amazing. And of course you're going to be referencing things that have been done before you, because it's, as we all know, is it possible to do something brand new? I don't know.
Yes, it is.
You know, do you think it is?
I do.
I feel like, you know, you've got, for me, it's the spring, summer,
I hope it is.
Jonathan, J.W. Anderson collection.
Oh God, we're bringing up all my least
I
favorite
know,
names.
but
You said Jacquemus earlier, I almost vomited.
I know your history. I've seen all your videos. No, I feel like, you know, going back to J.W. Anderson's Autumn-Winter 2013 collection with the little boots and the frilled shorts. For me, I mean, that was something that I personally haven't seen before necessarily. I mean,
Yeah, there've been loads of stuff like that.
And
if you look at like designers that really heavily reference club kids,
just not J.W. Anderson. Just not J.W. Anderson.
No, there were so many people like Gautier. Even Shalim was doing things that were really, really different, and he was kind of like playing with technology and doing things in that sense. And then you've got people like McQueen who had like Mr. Pearl on the runway and the corset. Like these things have been done, and but the thing is, like, the internet has changed the way that we see things because we have access to everything. So previous generations couldn't just like comb through Tumblr and be like, oh, a 20s dress.
Well, that's what I see so much in the design of Art School and Charles Jeffrey. Is
because we're trained to look at mood boards, right?
Yeah, is the kind of, I'm going to coin a new term here, Tumblrification of fashion.
Instagramification.
Or Instagramification.
But the thing is that, like, brands, so you were talking, obviously, Walter could do this because he had commercial sponsorship.
Right.
And because now brands are so concerned with their kind of, like, vision that they're reluctant to collaborate because brands at least like the sponsors behind them, they don't often allow you freedom to indulge in queer culture and to really explore those paths, because it still has to be if it's sponsored by a brand.
Well, they're sponsored by Man, they're sponsored by Top Man.
But it's different to being sponsored by, like, for example, like a jeans company that can give you quite a lot of creative freedom. I see Man as kind of more like a pathway. I see it as more
you're responding in a system. Like, this is the fashion system we've all created. This is the fashion system we're all a part of. I hate to be defeatist. I'm not being defeatist. I think we can have a better future. But this is beautiful. You know, look at that selection of 3 models, what they're wearing. Like, you know, go over to the brands that should be being held accountable and responsible. Armani, an utter load of shite every time. Valentino, absolutely shit every time. Dior, what a joke. Fucking,
I couldn't agree with you more about
capitalizing
Dior.
on feminism. This at least is like exciting in some way. This is diverse. This is like, you know, it's beautiful. It's emotional. You know, the brands that should be doing more to, I don't know, be saying something, the brands who have the platform, I think. I don't know. Maybe I'm going off on a tangent there, but
I feel like...
No, I'm glad you were dragging Dior. That's very important to do.
And I do feel for her, because I mean, imagine taking over from Raf. Like, I feel for her. But
I don't feel for her at all.
I feel for her. You know, it's harder. Also,
Her
none of
is
us
Margaret
what should be said is none of us are
clear.
women, and I do know a few women who really love what she's made, because she's designing for women, and there is a big thing to talk about in this conversation about gay men designing for women, gay men designing for gay men or men, and women designing for women, and that is something none of us will ever understand, because I don't know what it is like, and I don't know what it's like to look at a dress and be like, that is what will look good on my body. That's something Maria knows. Maria knows, Grazia Churi, and Raf probably didn't know as well. But I love, you know, of course, am I going on a tangent again? But anyway, I think there's something we should all, you know, be aware of, is that we're all men. Anyway, carry on. Sorry, Gina.
No, it's fine. I just wanted to bring up, like, and I know I'm sure that Finn will disagree, like, very, very, very
so
heavily.
predictable.
I know. No, because I feel like I agree that this format of a fashion show in front of, like, a group of people that is completely undemocratic and very elitist and very kind of like commercial, for both for Charles Jeffrey and for Man, it is kind of, I do have like this bitter like taste in my mouth, because I feel like kind of you see Loverboy and you see that party scene, and then you see it like transformed into a venue, and it kind of loses a bit of its charm. But I feel like the same could be said for someone like Vivienne Westwood, and that's the part, like, where I feel like what she was doing was so terribly like genius and progressive, and then for the few seasons it's just this venue and like these 7 rows.
I did want to bring up Westwood as well. Her last show was cheap and embarrassing, and I had this conversation with Lou of SHOWstudio, and I remember her saying, well, she doesn't really have to be in a position where she's innovating, you know? She doesn't have to be in a position where she has to worry what, you know, some 25-year-old guy like me thinks, whether it's cheap or not, because circuses look cheap to me. Yeah. And to bring this back to Walter, because we must talk about Walter some more, you know, when you've been an iconic designer and you are still designing, how necessary is it for you to be innovating and to stay relevant? Do we think Walter does that?
I do. I do think Walter does that. The thing is, like, brands like...
Can we look at it?
When I was growing up, it was like...
Yeah, so let's look at the show while we discuss that point. Go ahead.
Yeah, so you would save because, like, from a very working class background, so you have no money. So it's like you go into like the Vivienne Westwood shop in Leeds and you see a pair of trousers that are like 600 quid, and then you try and like scribble money away, but you don't necessarily do it you don't do it because it's like an innovative design. You do it because you've grown up on fashion, you've seen those designs, and you can see that blueprint in those new clothes. So it doesn't have to be innovative. I think it has to be faithful. And then I think the legacy of the clothing almost keeps selling them. I don't think...
Yeah, you buy a brand I don't buy a brand because you know, when I go online shopping, lol, but I like...
On ASOS?
I could not. No, when I go, girl, come out. When I go...
Etsy, at least Etsy.
Oh, Queen, stop it. When I go online shopping on Farfetch, actually.
Not Matches.
Style.com, which doesn't exist.
I go through the designers who I like, not because I know that anything will necessarily look like, you know, I miss out loads of designers that just they don't speak to me as designers, as people. So
Right.
Walter, I'm sorry, but I love Walter. He was on the cover of a magazine that my friend Amna and I founded, and he gave the most amazing interview, and I've loved him forever. But he's my favorite designer, Charles Jeffrey's better than this, by a mile. I'm sorry, but look, Charles Jeffrey is far more interesting. This is a bunch of wigs and bit of check and a bit of suiting. It might get more interesting as we go along, but if we're hailing him as this icon, yes, he's iconic, but this is, and I'd still buy it. I'd still click on him on Farfetch and be like, what's Walter doing? And probably, if I had any money, be like, oh, I love that because it's him.
Maybe the socks.
Don't you just love custard yellow?
I mean, I do love custard yellow. It's hard colour, but
You also said it, to be fair.
do you think that, Finn, do you think this is iconic? Do you think this is like groundbreaking and brilliant, the way we're holding him to that? Do you think that?
I'm actually quite pleasantly surprised by this show because I was bored by the kind of, the last season was very camo heavy and
Big gloves.
the big gloves, which I thought were a bit gimmicky and didn't really come off so well. You had this kind of folky troupe in the back who were doing kind of medievally type things, which again didn't really do it for me. Let's stay on this collection though, because I still want to look at this collection. This to me, I'm seeing a lot more of a silhouette, something that's a lot more playful. Some of these graphic cyber prints are obviously very reminiscent of his heyday. Or those kind of orange nylon, his heyday. These like orange nylon, large kind of rave pants. I've got to say, I absolutely love the wigs.
But can I just go back to something you said earlier about people referencing the past? That's what he's doing too. So
Well, he's referencing his past,
yeah, he's referencing
Yeah.
his
which is very
past. Fair
different.
enough, it is very different, but
The thing is, like,
I
no
just think
designer
there's I think
no designer over the course of 30 years is going to have consistently fantastic collections. But that's like if you look even when he had the explicit beauty, like the latex tops, like that was just a few seasons ago. So I think not
The ones
every
with the
season.
sign, like,
yeah.
Oh no, of course, I agree, but then I think we shouldn't be pitting him as this as this like, when we're like, well, when not all of us, but when some of us are like slating the Charles Jeffreys of the world
Yeah.
and slating the Westwoods of
Yeah,
the world,
that's the
what is
thing.
Walter doing here differently than what Westwood was doing in
Walter
his
can-
show?
No,
Like-
I would hold him to the same standard as Westwood. Absolutely, I don't think this is really going to change anything particularly.
Who do you think is going to change anything? Do you think anyone is?
Well, I feel currently that, and Vetements really epitomised this, that we're in very much a kind of holding pattern where we're suffering from a complete lack of new ideologies, and we are kind of just churning out quite normal looking stuff, kind of hoping that something will change. I think everyone's quite comfortable with capitalism.
Yeah.
I think that what's-
JW Anderson.
well, there we go, exactly. J.W. Anderson is a prime example. I think everyone's quite comfortable with capitalism, and when capitalism goes into crisis, people, even on the progressive left, say, oh, this is what we do to remedy it.
Yeah.
This is how we can kind of put a bandage over this amputation. And I see that in the arts. I see it reflected in music. I see it reflected in fashion, is that we're still trying to just kind of scrape by.
I agree.
I do think that young designers have a really, really difficult job because, for example, A, things are way more saturated than they used to be. B, you can look at Walter and you can be like, I probably would still buy the clothes based on the name. And also, there's just, budgets and things like that. Everything is so clustered that the big brands still get the exposure because they have the money. So I think it's one of those things where it's like, it's so difficult.
Yeah, you're right.
Young designers to
It
stand
is.
out.
But then even like people, if I know you're having a panel later this week or next week with Ray and like how groundbreaking can you call that anymore? I feel
Well, tune in on Friday.
I know. I feel like it's just for me. It's the whole idea of saying like, okay, Vivienne Westwood is the queen of punk. Walter Van Beirendonck is the king of like playful gay fashion. However you wanna, these like kind of titles, yes, they do exist, but they're, there's like very little, like Dries Van Noten, for me personally, he's a guy who was in Antwerp 6, so I assume he's around the same age as Walter. And for me, even though, like, I feel like even though his clothes are kind of just clothes and not much more than that, I feel like he is he keeps reinventing himself, and even though his fashion is nothing groundbreaking in terms of politics or anything like that, it's still new fashion each season, and it produces like fashion that is kind of just a bit in front of the trend. So it's Dries Van Noten. Like I feel like he's just producing clothes that is just a bit in front of what's happening right now.
The parallel that you can draw between these two is that, other than their Antwerp 6 hood, is that I remember Walter, when he split with the jeans brand in 2000, made a very conscious decision to go independent and very much stick to his existing customer base. And the same with Dries. He's not really looking to take over the world. He understands who his customer is. He plays very well to that customer each season, and it's stocked pretty consistently in the same places. And there's something, I guess, about them being quite comfortable with their client that I think encourages them to kind of, I guess, not really shake things up too dramatically.
Yeah, I mean, we do subconsciously hold people to different standards. It's like, say, for example, Ray, when you look at her contemporary, she's still super progressive because she had these women that didn't even look like women. They were like these huge things, like bumbling around the runway. Like, they weren't even really, you couldn't even identify them as human. Like, and in the context of Ray's past, that doesn't seem really progressive, but in the context of fashion as a whole, it's super progressive.
I mean, I question how progressive Ray is when she's kind of, I was really disappointing, when it was it's totally my fault for never realizing, but how undiverse her casting is. It literally
hold on.
It throws her whole canon for me into question.
I think that was very much. I remember seeing that meme being shared around, and I remember it was something about there's been no black model cast on a com show in 10 years, right? Okay, fine. That's a very hot topic right now. Absolutely, I get it, but to have something like that, which simply to me is a liberal talking point for this moment, undermine a legacy of incredibly avant-garde and progressive art and culture, when you have people like Jean-Michel, you have Basquiat on the runway, you have all sorts of incredible things going on in the early days. To me, that meme that got shared around, to me, epitomized the kind of superficial politics that we're stuck in at the moment.
Numbers.
I have to pull you up.
I don't think that's superficial at all. I don't think it's superficial at all to be disappointed by someone you like for doing something that you disagree with. And, everyone's like, I agree in her designs and her work with clothing and her work with, fashion. She's probably the most groundbreaking designer in history. However, I was really disappointed, and it throws into question a lot of my feelings about how passionately I was obsessed with her. I don't think it removes how brilliantly creative and amazing and groundbreaking the collections were, but it just,
Don't you?
I think it's an important issue. I don't think it's just it's about representation.
It should be like something.
And this is a collection, by the way, we should note is pretty undiverse, and I think that
again, Walter is, as we saw in the '96 collection, Walter is always involved an incredibly diverse cast.
That's the thing, though, isn't it? We talk about diversity as a talking point, whereas it should be something that's embedded into model casting.
Exactly.
Like, it should be a thing.
Well, it doesn't. I mean, it doesn't have to be.
Well, I think there's definitely you look at the stats and they've been pretty consistently bad.
I agree, I agree. I have to say, I agree that the fashion industry is overwhelmingly racist,
That's the
and
thing,
particularly
it's the
towards
fashion
black
industry as a whole.
designers and black gay designers. And I'm a huge advocate for Shane Oliver of Hood by Air. I'm a huge advocate for Telfar, who have been around for a very long time, designing what is basically, Wales Bonner's last collection owed a lot to Telfar. Vetmon's entire catalogue owes everything to Hood by Air. And these designers don't get recognized. Now, in terms of models, I think it's a very different conversation, because these are not people who are empowered in the industry.
Can I say one thing? Don't you think that it's a bigger problem that you, as a big fan of Ray and Com, didn't notice that?
Yeah, of course, and
that's what I mean. Yeah, and I don't think that's what you're wrong. That
I'm
you're
first and happy to admit that I was wrong, and I was blind to that.
But I think
I'm a white person. I'm definitely involved in.
But I think it's you as Tom that's wrong. I think that's what I mean. That it's not necessarily Ray who's racist or Junior who was racist the few seasons ago when he did his show. But
I mean, it might not be racist, but it's like. biased.
I completely, I completely agree with that. I completely agree.
Can I also point out we're an all-white cast here?
Yeah, exactly.
Studio, which will come up on the comment section.
Of course, and all men talking about this, and fully, like, we're all, there's,
That's the thing, though, isn't it? That's why it can't be a seasonal talking point, because if you're talking about shifting the system, it's talking about writers that could be getting this. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's everything. Like, no one's saying that it has to change overnight, and that's why the language of fashion and the trend system in general really bugs me, because I think we're moving to a point now, like, some brands don't show every season because they just don't have something to show. Like, it's not about, like, diversity isn't a trend, it should be just something that gradually shifts. Like, it's about shifting the system over a period of time.
Well, I think...
ideally it would shift right now.
Yeah, ideally.
Obviously, it has to gradually shift, and we need, I'm not going to say that.
I mean, it's like the whole takedown thing. Like, people get so kind of like, it's not about saying that Ray's racist, and it's not about saying that you can't appreciate her legacy. Because I still.
I don't think she's racist.
No,
but I do think there is a racism there.
No, I feel like the critique is like, it's kind of like is a bit like outdated. I think this should, of course, anytime anyone brings it up, it's positive and it's for a change, and that's all great. But I feel like it's all deep down inside us. And it's all of our faults as well as hers in a way, and that's kind of that's my whole point.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's definitely. It's like, the fault of white people.
I suppose what we're coalescing around is this prevalence of identity politics in fashion, also in politics itself, in music, everywhere. And that ties in again with sexuality, it ties in with talking about men designing for women. Identity politics has become so prevalent. When you go back and look at what was going on in the 90s, which was an incredibly exciting time, some of those shows would be absolutely slated for being culturally insensitive. You think of at the time it was, you think of Jean-Paul Gaultier's Rabbi Chic collection, or indeed the Tattoos collection. I mean, he did come under a lot of heat at the time as well about that. But we are definitely in a very different moment where those things do not get by lightly.
You think that's a good thing?
I have mixed feelings about it, because I actually studied, I did a kind of dissertation in Black cultural studies, so I'm very interested in that topic, but I think we've got to the point where a liberal elite, particularly in the fashion industry, and quite high levels of the fashion industry, are acting in a quite proto-fascist way, telling people how they can talk and how they can how they're supposed to cast shows, and I don't think it's helpful, and this particularly on the Vetements issue, a brand that I don't like, I don't think are people who really know how to handle black identity, and I don't think they should be being forced to use models that they don't understand how to really play with. And you saw in the Stereotypes collection when they brought out that one bouncer look, how clumsily a brand like that can handle race when they're forced to, and I think that's bad news for everyone, really.
The thing is that, like, if it really were a liberal elite that was saying you have to have this number of this, then it wouldn't be a problem. Because if that liberal elite were genuinely pushing those diversity quotas, we would have diversity. It wouldn't be a conversation. But so I think it's one of those things where it's like, it can be very easy to shut down because people have to, at some point, whether you agree with it or not, like, take accountability, and people don't want to.
Of course, I think that's the thing. Like, one of the first things when we were at the panel for the Vetements show, probably one of the first points was like, look at how they treated the non-white people in the show.
Like that.
No, it's fine. It's just that in this show, I think because it's so true what you said. It's the same with Ray. It's the same now. We're going through this Walter Van Beirendonck, and it's a kind of you see him as a legend, and he's in your mind as this legendary designer, but. Scrolling through this, I don't think I've seen a non-white model, or maybe I can see it's from afar, so I'm not being racist. But it feels like it's also racially it's not diverse. But in this instance, that's not a talking point in the same way that it was with Vetements, because and I'm the first one to admit that I was the one who noticed it first, because it's Vetements, because it's this new cool people that are 20-something or early 30s that should be liberal, that should be open to all this, and they don't have a past of being extremely inclusive. So it's that case of double standards that Jake mentioned before, and seeing you have this kind of idea of a designer, and how he acts within that idea of yours is how we critique people.
But that's why we question everyone, and that goes back to the whole conversation of someone like Walter being critiqued very differently to someone like Charles Jeffrey, because Charles Jeffrey has very openly kind of like celebrated queer culture, and obviously Walter, he's done really huge things. And in terms of diversity in the past, he has spoken about racism. He has always kind of made it a point of focus.
It's like what the reason Charles Jeffrey exists is because Walter exists. That makes sense. I think it's a canon.
Exactly.
It's about it's like the reason Britney exists is because Madonna exists. But seriously, as in the reason I'm not trying to remove people's agency, but like the reason so many contemporary people exist and work in the ways they do are because they had predecessors who were the first people to step out and do it. So Walter was in among them, as Madonna was definitely in among the first people to step out and be like, hypersexual, very outspoken, very political as a female pop star. Before that, you had, Celine Dion is probably the biggest pop star before, who I'm obsessed with. I went to see her last night. I'm still very
Celine
emotional
Dion.
about it.
Last night, here.
Yeah, last night I literally bawled for 2 hours. Anyway, genuinely, but I think
Now that's gay culture.
I think actually that is gay culture. But I think what's interesting is, I guess we have to, give a nod to a canon, and Walter. People like Walter have allowed space for people like Charles Jeffrey. But I do think Charles Jeffrey is producing more interesting work than this.
And even Walter's
to me
recent work.
This to me is, but I mean, next season Walter might come out with something iconic. I actually liked last season, the season that you didn't like.
Yeah.
I actually liked that season. I tried to save it for a jacket for ages, then spent it on fags. But, like...
Cigarettes,
yeah. I mean, but like, I just think that's an interesting point.
He always has a strong concept, and that's the weird thing about this collection is like there were still those references there. Like you have the references to rape culture and stuff, and I still think it's interesting. But if it goes back to Walter, like...
To gay culture? Is that what you said, Jake?
Rape culture.
Okay, sorry.
I think the two are kind of embedded. Like, if you look at gay culture in fashion, it's always club kids. Like, we have a lot of, like nightlife culture. It's about that whole thing, isn't it? It was like escapism and hedonism, the dressing up and the expressing yourself. And I think that became part of fashion in a really positive way, and still is.
One thing that Walter was always very strong at was playing with language, playing with lettering, and this is something that is just so all over the place right now. It's, like we mentioned earlier, Dior rehashing the Catherine Hamnett t-shirts, all these slogans and stuff, which is something Walter was very effective at doing. I guess we're missing a bit of that text, or that level of message from this.
Don't you think that for him, maybe in a way, for him not doing it, it's kind of, I don't know, I mean, maybe I'm looking too much into it and giving him too much credit, but by not doing the lettering, by not doing, like he's an educator, he's a teacher, I feel like he doesn't kind of, I feel like and I've read quite a few interviews with him, and I feel like he's so critical of the fashion industry that I feel like he's not doing it because he knows that Dior is doing it and he hates it. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like maybe I'm looking too much into it.
Or even Gucci with their whole Gucci-fy yourself.
Yeah.
But do you really see like Walter Van Beirendonck in like a Vogue trend report? Because it's like he kind of operates within the system, but also without, like, he's not really talked about in the same conversation.
I think Walter kind of operates slightly outside the system.
Yeah, same.
That's why I still love him, because I think, in a way, he's kind of quite quiet. He sort of does his own thing,
But it's about being an independent brand as well, and he's not really beholden to anyone other than, I suppose, the Academy in Antwerp.
Yeah. I guess it's interesting what you say about what would a slogan T-shirt say now? What would it say? I read this amazing thing by Susie Menkes, maybe 3 years ago, and she was befuddled at people walking around with slogan T-shirts on, and she was like, have they read them? They say Las Vegas, New York, Milan, Paris. And it is quite often I do see, not that I want to judge anyone for what they wear, but often I do see something and I'm like, have you read what the top says?
Well, there was that ASAP Rocky
say?
video recently where he was wearing the Dior "We Should All Be Feminist" T-shirt.
Oh, savage.
And
it's like 480 quid as well, isn't it? Disgusting. That is
ridiculous,
absolutely grotesque misuse.
But then they decided
of
to give it all to charity, didn't they?
Sorry?
They gave it to, I think they donated.
Oh, did they?
To Rihanna's charity or something.
That's
fine.
No, because I was exactly the same, because it's We Should All Be Feminists. It's quite a linear. It's quite.
I do love the Jadior bags and the kitten heels. Quite my drag character do quite want like a little shaddy or side bag. If anyone can sort that out for me here, that'd be great.
Should we talk about the clothes? Sorry.
Right
No,
into
I'm
it,
intrigued. I really want to know, like, whether you guys wear this. Like, would you? I mean, do you find these clothes, like, if you saw it on ASOS, sorry, Farfetch?
It's John Jay. Thank you very much. It got on sale, but it's originally very expensive. Whatever.
Would you wear it? Like, would you actually buy it?
Well, I have to consider, just going to put it out there, I'm kind of, I'm slightly bigger bodied. I'm
These models are very
very
wayfish.
thin. So I instantly look at every fashion collection, I'm like, probably couldn't wear it, except that green coat, but it will probably fit me very tightly.
And where the wild things are type of hood on it.
No, the other one, the
the other one, yeah.
But yeah, I think if I could, I would wear a lot. I actually would wear a lot of it, like the green, the shirts.
I mean, that's kind of, I feel like that's the point to talk about in a way, because we're talking about so much about culture and activism and everything else, and I feel like at the end of the day, they are clothes.
Ooh,
and
I don't know if that...
in a way, like he is showing clothes that he wants to sell. There's buyers sitting in the show. Like he wants to sell these clothes. I'm even though I'm sure he has a message with it. I'm sure he does. He does want to sell these clothes. He wouldn't show at Paris Fashion Week Men's on the schedule while all the press and all the buyers are there. If the point of this was not at the end of the day to sell the clothes.
Well, I mean, you can do both. Like, you can sell the clothes and still have a message.
Completely.
And it's like, also, like, we're like fashion journalists, so we work inside the industry, so there has to sometimes be a wider narrative than just the clothes, if there is one. Sometimes
I would never call myself a fashion journalist, just FYI.
Jono.
You're a fashion thinker.
Do you think that is the case when you look at a collection? I mean, yeah, you're right.
Sometimes.
No, I'm agreeing with you in a way. As a fashion journal, I think I don't know if it's about wearability. Like, look at Ray. Go back to Ray Kawakubo. You couldn't wear last season's collection, but it was still hailed as.
Well, I think this came up on the panel.
Is it about wearability, or is it actually about statement,
wearable clothes
culture?
Don't make news, do they? Like, wearable clothes just don't make news. Wearable clothes, they kind of like, they're there and they exist for a reason, and it is fashion ultimately. But that's what sets apart the people that are starting these conversations. And the thing
I
is,
would wear the com thing.
But Ray's shows are a different point. Like, I talked to Molly Goddard for the new issue of Sleek magazine, and her favorite thing about Ray is the show. Like, it's the show and how what you see in the show, the whole kind of transformation of that into what happens in the shops. And at the end of the day, I fully agree. Like, it's not just that I want to talk about the clothes. Oh my God, this collar is super cute. Like, no, or like this shoe is totally spring summer 18. No, but I mean, we have to kind of give it a context of the clothes, and rather than just a cultural context at the end of the day.
But you can also the clothes are good. Like, you've got the baggy cargo pants. You've got
Would I wear it?
Would anyone else wear it?
I would wear those like tight. I would wear that like blazer with the eyes, with a bit of like Matisse-esque.
I'd wear some like the really kind of oversized tops and the coats. I think they're really.
And I can see you in it all. I can see you.
I'm going to be honest. I haven't, and I heard this from a lot of friends of mine as well. I haven't bought new clothes in a very long time. I buy everything on eBay or in vintage shops because, quite frankly, the quality of clothes, even from the best designers, and as you can see, there was a recent article about all the Gucci eyewear and some other eyewear brands saying they were made in Italy but actually being made in China. All of this stuff is of a much worse quality these days, and you're buying inferior product at extortionate prices. And so I guess that's where I kind of don't really mind so much if if we talk about business of this stuff or not, is because, to me, design has to be about advancing culture and I'm not really interested in if people are buying it.
It all serves a purpose. Like, I think.
But would it exist if people weren't buying it? Would, like, if Walter's collections, there were 6 people in Antwerp 6. From all of them, you've still got Anne, you've got Dries, you've got Walter, and you've got Dick Bickenberg. Like,
is he still designing?
Yeah, he's still got like his underwear brand and.
Oh goodness.
Yeah. So there's the 2, which I'm ashamed for like calling myself anything fashion, and I don't know their names, but
Dirk Van Zane.
Willy van der Peer.
Yeah, Willy van der Peer. Yeah, he still kind of does stuff, right?
I mean, he shoots like
yeah,
everything.
exactly. So
He shoots everything.
Yeah. Fair enough. But like, so there's one designer who was obviously they don't really, you know, sell. So I feel like if his clothes didn't sell back then, like, and if it wasn't a viable business, at some point at least, it wouldn't be shown today and it wouldn't be making a statement that it does. So I feel like in fashion, yes, it's important to make a statement, but to exist, it has to.
I think I've always been inspired by the people who
the underdogs
do stuff and then end up completely penniless after the whole thing. I mean, I'm obviously a huge fan of like Malcolm McLaren and the Sex Pistols. I think they had no money after that whole experiment, but that was a real cultural explosion that was nothing to do with, which actually probably left them poorer than when they began. So, you know, with seeing like a show like the 96 show that Walter did, you know, that was probably kind of a loss-making situation. And sometimes those kind of moments are needed in culture to kind of move it forward. And I guess we're all in such a precarious position financially. I mean, just speaking for myself, that it's very difficult to have that level of, I'm just going to do this and fuck everything else, because we're all kind of beholden to
our landlord.
You'd love to look at it. You'd love to look at that explosion happen. I mean, I'm the first, you know, it's like a car crash that you're looking at and you can't look away because it's something, not that something amazing comes out of a car crash, but like it's something amazing is about to happen and it's about to explode, and kind of like you want to look at it and you enjoy it, but then you don't really like ask now where is like, you know, where are all these people that are like penniless and like where are they working, what are they doing?
So it's quite sad in a way. I mean, maybe it's, I don't know. Also, yeah.
It comes down to like who's buying it as well, because someone like Walter, I guess, the people that kind of like came out and supported him in the first place, obviously now they're growing up with him. So I think there would still be an element of brand loyalty there that you would still invest in maybe one or two pieces. But I mean, I'm generally speaking, like quite broadly speaking, but I think young people can really afford. But I could, you know, like everybody, I think, if they made like wise choices.
Here's a slightly more boring side of fashion that I just talked about.
But like,
Quite like, I'm sorry, I'm quite like, that's
it's all about investment pieces, isn't it?
Let's talk
Like
about
some
the
of these
gays,
things.
you know. Let's talk about some homos.
Like some of them are like investment pieces, so you could see it and you could very definitively know that it was from this collection.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes,
I feel like his clothes are not like as ridiculously expensive as Charles Jeffries.
Are you kidding me?
No, you can buy a jumpsuit. No, you can buy a jumpsuit in Dover Street Market. It was like £500, like a full boiler suit. By
a lot of money.
No, not that I could afford it, because obviously I would be wearing it now. But I'm just saying it's not as ridiculous as like Charles Jeffrey Taylor jacket that's like over £1,000.
I think what bugs me, and this is again going back to me being a bit of a vintage queen, is that you can buy iconic pieces for such cheap prices compared to what is in Dover Street Market these days. And I would highly encourage everybody watching this to go out and do that.
You do look like everything could be if you were like all Dover Street, you know. It looks like that.
You didn't say I look Dover Street, did you?
Oh my God, you just insulted him.
Well, listen, on that note, we have Com coming up on Friday, so I can trash Dover Street then. So thank you very much for tuning in. Thanks to my great panelists.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.